It's common in optics experiments to need to measure a small signal in the presence of a large background noise. For instance, right now, I'm taking this helium-neon laser and sending it through an iodine cell. Part of that laser gets absorbed and produces fluorescence that I can detect on this large area photodiode. However, that fluorescence is small, and particularly in the presence of background light, like the room noise, it's going to be very difficult to see that and distinguish it from background light. Now I've taken the output of this photodiode and put it on the oscilloscope, and there is a signal there, but it's dominated by the background light. In fact, when I block or unblock the laser, I barely notice a change. Now there's a few things you can do in a situation like this.